G'day guys. This is a video that I'm just going to do on methylation and detox. So looking at genetics. So those who have, done genetic tests or have got informational data, stuff like that. So, pretty much I'm just going to share the screen and we'll get going. In share. So this is called geneticgenie.org. I'll put it in the description. So you've basically got a methylation panel and a detox panel. So pretty much we will load the files. So you've got a zip file for 23andMe. Now, I'll just go through this general information. So upload raw data from Ancestry, DNA, 23andMe, MyHeritage, FTD DNA, Living DNA, Home DNA, we Gene, 23 Mofang, and others to upload a whole genome sequence, WGS/WES files, in .vcf, .gr, or .vcf format. There's a limit of 1 gigabyte. You're not going to hit that anyway from any of the genomic stuff. They're pretty small in comparison to files. If you have uploaded WGS/WES and both the SNP and index file, please upload the SNP file, so because that will actually link back to the other file. No information about upload files are saved or shared, so that's a pretty good thing. So this is a sort of a free site, plus you can actually donate if you wish. Uploaded files are de-identified on our server and deleted within 24 hours. So if you basically got a name or whatever, it's deleted, and then you have to basically re-upload it and do a fresh thing each time you want to, or you can save it off, which is the other thing. So let's do the methylation one first and upload it. Okay. So it is as simple as that. And there it is, done. Voila. So completed. So basically all the green ones are what is called the what they consider the normal, or what's been identified from studies as the normal in terms of methylation. Homozygous, you're basically looking at, you've got 2 alleles that basically are of the what are considered negative, and heterozygous, which is you've got 1 of each. Got it? So that's basically when it comes to normal, it can be either one, because sometimes the actual good one is to have 1 of each. So it can be quite different. It depends on what is considered the one which is ancestral in a sense. Anyway, and all the other ones are sort of mutations that exist within, for a whole lot of reasons. I mean, there's mutations for people that have got basically sickle cell anemia and other things like that, and that was basically a protective mechanism for malaria. So there's a lot of things that do emerge that have got some, provide some protection, anyway. So you can basically save it also as a PDF, and it will generate a PDF file, and then you can save that off and you can store it somewhere. So you've got it in that regard. Okay, give you the date that it was generated and the methylation profile of that person. Then we will do the same thing. So we can do the detox one, bring that up, upload the file, and do the upload. As you can see, it's pretty fast with 23andMe data. It doesn't take long to basically bring up on the screen. Happens pretty rapidly. It's just about to happen. And there it is, done. So, as again, when you get a no call, it basically means that you haven't, this hasn't been, they don't have any data in your file. So when you go to a different service, you end up getting different types of panels done, depending on what you've paid for. I did the, if you remember, the $99 one. I didn't do the complete one, which is the more, not complete one, the more comprehensive one, which is about $200 odd. I think they've brought it down to 150 now, 149 US, whatever it is. Same principle, you can save it off as a PDF, so you've got it in that regard. It's as simple as that. And then you can go through, as you can see, my detoxification pathways are fairly good, bar one. And you can always go into Snippedia, and we can look that up. So mine was GGCC. So TT is AA, just for those who are basically trying to work things out. So in that regard, I'll just go through. Superoxide dismutase 2 activity was 33% higher in CT and TT individuals compared to CC. So obviously, if you're not on an inflammatory diet, it doesn't really make that much difference as in that regard. Regardless of the other, this resolves in several phenotype associations have been reported for this SNP, including. So this one here, just because it's a GG, doesn't actually, there's a obviously, if we look at different populations here, you know, the dominant, even in the sort of Kenyans, the Maasai, you know, it's the actual somewhere in between, in a sense. And I'll give you an example of this. So a 10-fold higher risk for heart disease in hereditary hemochromatosis patients with TT. So you've got to have the other sort of hemochromatosis type thing, and then if you've got a TT and similar for CT. So there's that sort of less risk on the other one, an increased risk of malignant pleural mesothelioma was found in individuals with a CC, prostate cancer with TT, but not with CC, which is what I am. So for those with the TT, there was a higher iron intake level associated with 2.3-fold increase. That's relative risk anyway, so I wouldn't actually pay too much credence. A lot of these things are in that regard. And when we look through to here, as you can see, it's others in significance. It's not sort of like clearly a pathogenic in any regard. It's variable, and it just creates certain relative risks. This is a lot of it associational in regards to this one. That's why we have 1.1, 1.1, 1.1 magnitude for every single one. So whichever you have, you've got some susceptibility. That's it. You know, a 1.1 fold is like a 10%. It's not like a 4 or a 5, which is a 4 to 5 fold. That's a different, you know, kettle of fish altogether. So these are quite low. So pretty much that is a insignificant one in terms of the only one that I really have. And the other ones, you know, that's not a recall. That's basically somewhere in between, somewhere in between, somewhere in between, somewhere in between, somewhere in between. So the majority of my detox pathways are fairly good. I've seen worse. I know Chris Master John has far worse on his panel in terms of detox. So I'm a bit better in that regard, substantially better than a vast proportion of the population. So I've got, as I said, pretty good detox genes for most things. Methylation is where I actually suffer, like the MTHFR, which is this one here. That is the big one for me, which is basically this folic acid processing homocysteine levels. So this is the one where it can be rectified with riboflavin. If you remember the one that I talked about this one, where I showed that study and the riboflavin, it actually turns that gene back to actually behaving as a normal. And if you can see, AA, which is basically this. So that's heterozygous, that's homozygous. So I've got both. That's the normal. And so basically, when it comes to this one, it's 10 to 20% efficiency in processing folic acid and high homocysteine, low B12 and folate levels, which can be corrected with riboflavin. So the actual gene can be improved it can be upregulated, but you know, the transcription factor, that is, only with riboflavin. That means a lot of riboflavin, which you tend to get in animal foods excessively. Like dairy is very high in riboflavin. I mean, just a large glass of milk will give you nearly 100%. So you can understand that basically when you have high amounts of certain B vitamins, obviously this will happen. So you will find this in more pastoral populations, especially the ones that have got the genes, the sort of Indo-European type genes for lactose persistency. Yes, so one of those things, as you can see. As you can see, this is much higher in Southern Europeans. When you look at the Maasai, it's non-existent. It's about 0.6%. Fuck all. That's another population where, you know, Han Chinese again, and Southern Europeans, it's about the same. When it comes to a TT alleles, they are, let me just say that again, the homozygous. they will basically be a quarter of the population. So it's a significant portion of the population that has this problem, like myself. But as I said, it can be rectified with higher level of consumption of milk or meat, which is also another high source of B2 or riboflavin to be precise. This is the other one. Okay, so when I oxidase a degradase, so affects serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine. So let me just go back to here, which is that one, TT. So I've got basically reduced. Okay, and my stomach is telling me not to fast this long. Anyway, I better go to bed. It should quieten down. I want food. Didn't give it enough. Been doing it on-off fast. So I don't know, it just felt like it. So yeah, so that's basically the way you can actually look these up in that regard. You know, you'll get some associational studies in regards to this, some risks. A lot of this is associational, so I pretty much don't give it too much credence in that regard. So don't, you know, I mean, that is quite high in that regard. So it's the increase. So they sort of consider the in-between sort of, but again, we're still, as you can see, they usually color code these when they're really confident about the issue in that regard. So subjects with a major depressive disorder with a higher activity form of the enzyme. So a significant lower magnitude of placebo response. So, you know, it's one good thing not to have. So there can be variations with a lot of these. When you don't see a color coding in here, it pretty much, you know, there's at both ends there are issues. Somewhere in between is probably the safer way where to be in that regard. But then again, remember, this is not your. It just tells you about risk. It doesn't. It's not your destiny, so to speak, which is the actual word. It's not your basically your destiny in this regard. So I think if you're a species appropriate diet, most of these genes get turned off. They get silenced, you know, they get methylated. So they get silenced because there's a lot of methyl donors when it comes to animal foods, you know, especially when you're looking at choline, methionine, these sort of things, which you won't find in plants. So that's where the advantage of a carnivore diet is, a more animal-based diet that will actually methylate these and actually turn them off or improve their activation, like the one with that we looked at before. So think of those things in those terms. Some of these things are more cryptic than others. You can actually then look them up in studies and see, but ultimately it's looking at the type of foods you know, if you've got a lot of methylation issues or a lot of basically detox issues, well, that, you know, let's just first start about the methylation stuff. So I'll just stop there. So if you're looking at basically the methylation side of things, what it actually is telling you is that, you know, you need to eat certain types of micronutrients and all that are going to actually positively influence. They could be choline, they could be basically riboflavin, there could be variations in terms of, I don't like, actually, I prefer allowing the body and getting some level of folate, because folate can be a problem. There are some genetics for some people that can be a problem. That's a separate video that I do intend to make on folate, where under certain people with certain genetics it can be toxic. So, but that's a step for another time. It's in my list of things to do. But this one was really just to show you the, you know, the type of program online sort of a website that exists to check these, and then use Snipedia to basically get some understanding of what they are and stuff like that. There are links to studies and stuff like that. Always be careful whether the studies are actually a randomized control study or an associational. Associational just means there is an identified risk factor, and it depends on what magnitude it is to tell you whether that is, you know, high magnitude or low magnitude, or whether you should really be concerned in that regard. But ultimately, what this is to give you a general outline of, you know, risk factors, and then probably focus your mind on, you know, the right micronutrition to get in order to avoid any of the ramifications of that. So in my case, I've got issues where I have to cover myself with choline, and I've got issues which have to cover myself with things like B2, riboflavin. So whether it's, and the nice thing about it is that I also eat some bit of organ meats here and there, stuff like that. So I do get enough folate from those. I eat eggs for the choline, but I also get you know, folate from that as well. So there's a number of different sources in that regard, and I sort of cover that, upregulate the sort of the gene expression, so, and furnish it with sufficient B12 and a bit of folate, plus add the additional oomph or boost to that part of the methylation with riboflavin, and, you know, you're fine in a sense. It's still on there. You know, we're talking about a quarter of the population. When we're looking at Northern Europeans, it's much lower in that regard. When it comes to that methylation, if we go back, so as you can see, with Northern Europeans, it's about 8.8%, so nearly 9%. So, you know, 90% of the population, when it comes to, it's about nearly 47%, not an issue, about 44%, somewhere in between. You know, with a bit of riboflavin, they can be sorted out pretty easy, that percentage. These people require far more. So it's a small group, but you need that extra boost to basically support your methylation. So that's sort of generally just to give a general outline of the type of services that exist where you can upload and get some general information. Now, if you've got something and you want some clarification or whatever, attach your PDFs to an email, send them to me, and I'll give you a bit of a rundown on that. So this video is just generally designed not to basically cover all the methylation or the detox pathways, but just to give you just a general outline and give you a source of where you can actually do this analysis. And for more detailed genomics, that would take a bit of a look, and then quite some time to basically analyze it properly and look at it from all the different pathways, because sometimes certain pathways can have a certain effect and they could be related to another pathway, but they may not be. And so you may have one of the, you may be fine in one pathway, but not so fine in another pathway. You may be not fine in both pathways, so you need a different approach compared to somebody who's only partially affected in one pathway. So there is some redundancy, and if both areas are down-regulated, obviously you've got to have a different approach to someone who's only got one part. So there are going to be some variations in the type of thing. Now, obviously, I don't have time to basically, look into detailed genomics for people and give them an analysis in that regard. But, I can do it, but it means you won't get a quick response, or it'll be put on the back burner. When I have some free time, I'll look at it, basically. So it could happen in the next day if you're the first person, but it may not. It may happen a week or two away, depending on when I get around. I'll just create a folder, stick the stuff into a folder, and when I get around to it. If you want somebody to go through it a bit earlier than that, the best person would be Mary's pretty good at those sort of genomics. She's looked at them before, like myself, so she's got a bit of more of an insight. I don't know how much Bart has looked into this sort of stuff, or Pim, in terms of specifically these sort of panels, to sort of give you an analysis. You got to be very careful who you go to. Chris Master John looks at some of this sort of stuff and has come up with certain protocols or certain ideas which I reject completely, because he's seeing it in a reductionist way and he's ignoring the interaction of different pathways. And I've known people using some of his methods and they end up worse, and they have to take some other medication to counteract that. It ends up like, the naturopathic approach to allopathic medicine. I'll give you this supplement. Oh, that's just fucked you up, so I'll give you this. No, we don't want that. We basically just want customizing food, because at the end of the day, food is like medicine. And what it does is, depending on, the micronutrient profile, you may need to adjust, or slightly, you may need to include a bit of liver in your diet, or a bit more riboflavin, or a bit, things like more retinol from cod liver oil, or you may not, depending on those sort of things. So when I use food, humans have not supplemented. They have adapted to different environments, to different foods. That's why I say, look at your ancestors, and that will guide you to a large extent on how your genes would have evolved and what sort of foods are compatible with those things. So don't go crazy thinking that, I'm going to basically biohack myself with all these supplements. That's not a good idea. In many cases, you can actually make the condition worse. Too much of any good thing can make it worse, can create other imbalances with other areas. So that's why, don't look at this and say, oh, okay, I need all this supplement list, and away you go. You're going to create a lot of problems for yourself and a lot of issues if you do that. You need to look at it and say, what can I do? How can I customize what I eat in order to support these pathways in a natural way? Because when you eat certain things maybe a bit more than somebody else requires, then at least you take those nutrients in, and your body will decide, will actually work out, a sort of, we'll do a bit of a look at that and say, yep, we'll take this, we'll take that, we'll use this for that, and whatever else. That's safer, the body's been doing it for a long time. It's not stupid. It knows how. It's just basically we've moved away from ancestral stuff, and sometimes we've moved away from also our genetic heritage, which means that, if you a steak-only diet may work for a large proportion of people, not an issue. But if you're one of those unlucky people that are in the 9% or whatever, it may not work as well. You may need a bit more in terms of certain supported nutrients. So this is what we're saying, So if you're in that exception group of 25% or 10% or whatever, it means that you may have to customize slightly your diet and include certain foods you may have not traditionally consumed yourself, but your ancestors may have. And so that means that if your ancestors have been doing that for a number of generations, they may have down-regulated certain genetic pathways or upregulated them or whatever, depending on what they're eating or whatever. And that would have had an effect on the profile. Most people, if you go back traditionally, they had very routine, very simple food. They didn't have the wide selection we have from all over the world. They basically ate localized, seasonally, what was available, and that's what your genes have developed over a very long time. Just because in the last, 50 odd years or whatever, we jettisoned all that sort of stuff, and we've included a whole lot of things that have never been part of our diet in the past, or part of our ancestral, our immediate ancestors for the last couple of generations. That doesn't mean you're on the right you're on the right path anymore. You could be substantially off it, but then again, if you don't have a lot of these genetics that require certain specific types of foods, then you're probably okay. There's a number of examples out there in the carnivore community that do well on a steak-only diet. Kelly Hogan, she's one of those examples. Sean is another example. There's a number of them out there, but then there's a lot of others that aren't doing as well, and they're bitching and moaning, and they don't realize that they may have some underlying genetics that are basically, causing those issues, but they're just not aware. And because they're not aware, they're not adding some other animal foods in there, and they're not making adjustments slightly to their diet. That's where the issue can happen. Now, you may be one of those people. You may not be. You may basically discover, yep, I'm fine. I'm just in that general group. I'm good to go. Don't worry about it. But then again, you may be one of those unlucky people that have a few of these things, like myself with the MTHFR and a few others. So it depends in that regard. So look, it's not meant to basically make you go paranoid, really weird and crazy, or start going, oh, I need to supplement all these things. No, you fucking don't. Don't be silly. What you need to do is include certain types of foods that will basically furnish the nutrients that your body requires, because you've, slightly down-regulated, certain pathways have been slightly down-regulated due to what your immediate ancestors for the last couple of generations have been doing. That's what we're trying to get to. Those little, you could say, we want to make adjustments to your carnivore diet. Slight adjustments, that's it. You don't want to go crazy with all these supplements and all that. Because a lot of people do that and they get themselves into a lot of trouble. And that's one reason I got, I've listened to some of these people when they've come back to these people and complained and asked them, oh, this isn't working and that's not working. And I listen and I'm going, just, yeah, obviously, because basically you're trying to supplement a problem, which is a dietary issue, and you're causing further dysregulation, because supplements, they're not well managed. They get absorbed, especially in large amounts, can be very problematic, cause a lot of imbalances. It's a thing like why I and and try to remind you guys, don't go crazy on the B vitamins. There's a point where when you restore a good gut microbiome, and you support those little critters with vitamin D, at that point you want to take away the fuel, because they will be producing, and then you can get an overvitaminosis, so you may, especially with pantothenic acid, and that can create insomnia and a whole lot of other related issues. So you've got to be very careful in regards to some of these things. So even B vitamins in excess. So if you're taking supplementing and the bug and the little microbes are producing them as well, then you've got a problem, So these are the things why we need to basically support a good gut microbiome with good nutrition and vitamin D or the sun. And that is when we're more in tune with the natural processes. And that's what we want. We do not want to basically be venturing into the supplemental world. There's a time and a place for supplements, but it's a limited time for most people, and for only some people it may be a more protracted period you may have to do it, and that's because of specific reasons for that person. There may be a lot of derangements that you're trying to correct and whatever else. That needs to be managed by somebody that they know what they're doing, and not by being done in a very capricious or ill-informed way, which most people are just throw things in and really don't know how they're actually interacting with their genes and with their food environment. So it's fraught with danger. This is why a lot of people, they get supplements or all sorts of supplements and they still don't resolve their issues, because supplements do not resolve issues. They can either mask issues, they can amplify issues. They are, I view them more as a short-term intervention. And in some cases, you don't even need many supplements. I mean, Terry Walsh, she pretty much used a lot of organ meats to get a lot of her nutrition back. So she was depleted, and that really fixed her up to a large extent and silenced a lot of the genes. But there are going to be variations. Some people basically where you, for a small period of time, you may need a much higher dose, and then you come off. A bit like the boron thing, high and then taper off to a low level, to a much safer level. Again, all these things, have their place and adjustments, and I'm confident that Mary's pretty good in this regard, because I've chatted with her about some of this sort of stuff, and she pretty much were in agreement on a lot of these protocols in that regard. The stuff that I've actually chatted with her, that is, I haven't chatted on every subject. Maybe some subjects we disagree, potentially, I don't know. But the thing is, you've got to find people in that regard. With me, it's going to be whenever I get around. So don't expect miracles in that regard. I do have a life. I do have a job, a full-time job. So this isn't my job. This is just me doing it as a community service, if you want to call it, or me giving something back to the society. That's basically it. So I hope this was informative. I hope you got something out of it, and be careful how you interpret this sort of data. Don't basically, you see a lot of red and go crazy thinking, oh, it's the end of the world. No, it is not. In many cases, being on a species appropriate diet and with some organ meats and stuff like that, you may have covered everything anyway, and you may be not feeling anything bad. You may be feeling, I feel fine. If you feel fine, why worry? You've probably covered all the bases. You just may want somebody like Uncle Harry to basically say, it's all right, dear, don't worry, pat you on the back, But beyond that, your genes aren't your destiny, guys. They're not your destiny. Just basically an adaptation at some point in time in your family history. for whatever reason that's actually happened. So you just need to know what adjustments or what customizations you need to do to lifestyle in order to mitigate some of this stuff. The areas where there's biggest concern is in the detox part, not in the methylation so much. Methylation, usually if you're on a species appropriate diet with some organ meats and stuff like that, and a bit of dairy, if you can tolerate it, it's a non-issue because there's high riboflavin even in the liver. Just have to be, don't go too crazy on liver. Small amounts every day, like an ounce is all you need under those circumstances. But when it comes to people which have issues like detox, that's a different issue because there you don't only have the food. That means you've got to keep the food very clean. But on the other hand, you've also got the environmental toxins and the environmental exposures that you need to sort of have a better understanding. Now, I do in future will make something on these issues, covering these issues in terms of detoxification. I mean, I've spoken a bit about selenide from selenium, sort of chelating mercury and getting it out. There's a number of other things as well out there in terms of dealing with these sort of metals, but not only metals, the chemical exposures. There's a whole lot of things that can affect a person. And if your detox capacity is low, that can be an issue. There can be basically other toxicities, past plant toxicities like oxalates. That's another issue. And if you're a poor detoxifier, that can be really, that's when you may need higher levels of sulfur aminos to deal with it compared to someone else. So there's all sorts of things. And then again, there can be some variations on that because you may have some other genetic SNPs that basically affect the sulfur pathways as well. So, it's not it can be slightly complicated to correct certain issues. And we live in a different environment. I mean, we don't live in a pristine environment like the Maasai or the Hudsons or all that. They're earthing themselves. They're living in an environment which is circadian rhythm. They're tuned. They don't have any chemical exposures in the environment, or petrochemicals or other things like furniture gassing off all sorts of stuff. Their carpets gassing stuff and all that sort of stuff. And sometimes somebody may be in a rental. Well, if you're in a rental, you just can't rip out the carpet or change certain things at will. Like in your home, you could do that, but within somebody else's property, you've got some limitations. So you've got to look at options, whether I stay in that and look for another rental, one option, or whether I basically try to mitigate with certain things. There can be basically some level of underlying mold. There can be an issue as well, and it may not be something easy you can resolve in that regard. Then there are plants that actually can, deal with mold. So there's a lot of things you can actually do slightly different in that regard. So it's something that I do want to eventually get into and look at some of these environmental things and things that we can use to basically mitigate this sort of stuff. That'll be later in this year because that takes a lot of effort to collate together a lot of that information and sort of explain it all properly. So that'll be down the track. I haven't really I know the stuff, but I just haven't put anything together in that regard. But it's stuff that I will do down the track. The key thing is the take-home message in this regard is do not panic. Your genes are not your destiny. I'll leave you with that. Anyway, see yous.